Welcome back, subscribers and people lost on the internet who are now very confused. In this video, I'm going to give 5 reasons as to why I think driving simulators have too many cars and why I think having fewer cars in driving simulators would be much better for both the players and the developers of simulators. It's win-win. So make yourself a cup of tea and let's get into this with point number 1. Having hundreds of cars in a simulator is intimidating to new drivers. If you have a million vehicles there and you know nothing about a sim, nothing about motorsport, can you not see how that is like really intimidating? You probably haven't even set up a steering wheel. You probably don't know how pedals operate. You probably don't even know how to use a clutch or a H pattern, heel and toe in, all the other stuff, everything that's involved with driving. And you then have to have a billion vehicles to somehow know which one to pick to start with and which is going to be good or bad for you and what you're likely or not likely to enjoy. This is just too much to throw on new players, and I think it actually just makes a lot of people literally just shut down and just go, no, I'm not going to do that. The same effect that DCS has on me when I load into the menu, or God forbid, load into the A10 Warthog and try to start that thing up. Like, he's just like, what? Okay, right, I get it. It can be fun for people that know what they're doing and are prepared to watch a 2-hour tutorial video before even doing stuff, but you have to admit, having too much stuff initially massively overwhelms new drivers, as opposed to having a really focused set of content, maybe a single specific series or even just a single car, to get people into the nature of what is driving, how do you use a wheel, how do you go around a track, how do you feel what the car's doing. You know, having a lot of cars is a complete bombardment. So the first thing is, for new drivers, too many vehicles is massively intimidating. I would say even just one class of vehicle would be perfect, but even a few series is probably fine. Too many is bad for new drivers. 2. Lots of cars break multiplayer and divide the user base between too much content. Now, if you watched our previous video about iRacing, you can just see this in effect, where they've got loads of series, lots of different vehicles. Obviously, there's a limited number of people playing online. The more different cars you have, the wider they're spread out and the worse racing you're going to get, because the less people you have to race against, the less likely you're going to have someone of a similar skill level to yourself to race against. Of course, if you have cars that are in the same class, you will put them all in the same race and they all probably drive relatively similar. So that puts everyone in the same server, which is actually the real beauty. As much as I hate GT3, especially as they're implemented in many simulators, as much as I have a grudge against GT3, a great thing about them is it puts everybody in the same server session. So with a simulator that doesn't have the most active of users, sim racing is a niche, and each individual car is a niche in a niche. By having a single type of car, a single class of car, it puts everybody in the same thing, and it makes up for the fact that there's just less players there. And so I begrudgingly have to give Kunos a lot of credit with Assetto Corsa Competizione for focusing predominantly on GT3 cars and GT3 series, because as you've seen from LFM, that has really actually taken off as a nice thing that you know what you're getting into and you're likely to have close racing with similar skilled people, even if your hands are completely numb from the lack of force feedback detail. So massively important for online racing, having fewer types of cars, fewer classes of cars, or having cars in the same class that can race together to bunch everyone together. Reason number 3. Most sim racers can't even drive half the cars that exist within 3 seconds of lap pace. So the fact is, I am a pretty terrible sim racer, right? But even I get in the top split on iRacing after spending a lot of time on it with various cars. On my iRating puts me in the top split. Even with me being terrible, I still finish in the top 5 or so with a lot of the cars in iRacing, up to like the F4, MX5, F4, F3, Formula Ford, and I'm still winning races. That's the top split in probably one of the most popular online competitive racing simulators. I'm crap at GT3. The point I'm making is I'm not very good, and even then I am getting to a level where most people are not even able to lap in a moderate pace, and that's with slower cars. So when you get to cars that are absolute handfuls, like some of the 90s, like Mazda 787B, Formula 80s, 90s Formula 1 cars, some of the fastest Formula cars from the 70s, God knows what, anything that's like a real beast of a car, which a lot of these sims that we've got now, R Factor 2, AMS2, AC, a lot of the vehicles in those games, no one is going to be able to drive them in a vaguely decent way to really understand what those cars are actually like to drive anyway. I think if those simulators focus on one car though, at least it means their attention is not divided between tons of vehicles and they can focus on mastering that one car. So this is where the games like the Codemasters Formula 1 titles, obviously their cars are a little bit sloppy and they're ironically harder to drive than AC, but because everyone is focused on driving those Formula 1 cars, all their time goes into that, and generally speaking, the worst drivers can actually get up to a reasonable pace with those vehicles. So having lots of vehicles just divides people's attention across too many cars for them to actually get good at any single car. Fewer cars means you can actually people can spend time on those cars, can get better at those cars, can have better racing with those cars, can also understand those vehicles and actually get the essence of those vehicles, rather than not getting the essence by pottering around completely off the pace. Don't get me wrong, I do still think it is fun. Do it like trying a car that you can't drive well at all. You know, it's kind of an experience in and of itself. But I think you get to a point with The Sims where there's billions of cars, it's just absurd. you're not even going to slightly understand them. I do get the role-playing part of it, though. 4. More development time can go into specific cars and specific car features, as well as tweaking the specific physics around cars as need be. So what you find is if a driving simulator tries to be a sandbox of cars and has hundreds, billions of vehicles, well, the developer then has to do a vintage tyre, a modern tyre, road tyre, cut slick tyres. Then they have to get everything working with all those tyres, and then all those different cars have to be implemented with those tyres and set up correctly in a way that makes them vaguely drivable. Whereas if a developer's like, okay, we're just doing GT3 cars, or we're just doing X specific type of vehicle formula cars, you know, they can make sure that what they do with their physics, and look, at the end of the day, nobody has the absolute magic data and nobody has a perfect model, tyre model, physics model or anything. At the end of the day, the developer can then focus their choices of design, the tweaking of the physics, the feedback to the physics programmer, the feedback from the car implementators, the people making the cars. It can all be focused on a specific type of vehicle, getting the absolute most out of the physics engine that you happen to have at hand. Too many vehicles, it's just like everything's all over the place. AMS2 is a perfect example of this. How many cars in AMS2 are actually vaguely decent? It's been out for a long time. They're not even doing the core physics programming. Stuff is massively all over the place in that game. The last update is a big improvement with some cars, but that's after like 3 years. R Factor 2 as well. They're literally cars in R Factor 2 from when it came out still to now, where you're just like, what on earth? You could have the really great tyre model, really great force feedback, but the development time is just spread across so much stuff and so much complexity that nothing can be really dialed in properly. Now, I will say, I do think modders can actually do content, and that doesn't affect development time. And, you know, again, you can have a sandbox engine. I do understand that. I do appreciate that. But I think if you're coming into buying a game as a consumer and you're like, oh, there's a simulator with 5 cars, and those 5 cars are absolutely exquisitely done, That is more appealing than 60 cars where it's a complete pick and mix and you don't know what's going to be what's going to have massive physics issues, what's going to have weird setup issues, what's literally just doesn't even drive like a vehicle. It's like the restaurant thing. You better go to a restaurant where they have like 3 things on the menu, but all 3 of those things are fantastically thought out, really fresh, and they can get the food out quickly because they don't have a billion things to put together, versus a restaurant that has 40 million things on the menu for you to pick. You're like, oh God, what do I pick for dinner? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? And when you do pick it, it's low quality and it takes ages for them to put together. Less is so much better when it comes to actually trying to deliver something to someone. It's much more likely to be better quality, not just in Sims, but in everything. So, reason number 5 is that a simulator is way more coherent when it contains a selection of cars from one series than when it has a hodgepodge of unrelated, disconnected cars. So I think, again, from a gameplay perspective, when you're playing a driving simulator, at the moment, AMS2, AC, R-Factor 2, Race Room, I actually do like these sims. I do play them far too much, but it's so incoherent, especially if you're coming to it as a new driver, a new sim racer. It's like, what is the actual progression? Like, what can you go through as a player? All you would need is like a go-kart, like an MX-5, a slow Formula Trainer, Formula Ford, F3, F4, F1. Then you've got like a coherent, and that's with different vehicles. That's a coherent, very true to real life driver progression of things to go through. It's obvious to someone coming to it that this is a trainer car, this is a road car, this is a Formula car. You know, this is where you start your career, this is where you end your career, this is how you could go through it as a actual thing to do, as a story arc. It just makes sense. Whereas if it's like, oh, it is a Brazilian Formula 1 car, oh, here's a British 3-wheel drive, here's a Land Rover, you know, It just feels like someone's just thrown a bunch of stuff in a bucket with no real sense or meaning to it. And I just think, even if you know what you're doing with simulators, even if you understand motorsport, even if you like the novelty of different vehicles, that disjointed, incoherent nature of it is very off-putting. Especially if you're someone that likes to play multiple simulators and maybe is like, oh, there's a new sim coming out. What is that sim about? What is the point of that simulator? Again, with ACC and I think the new Motorsport Game Sim, you know, if you say, well, no, this is an endurance simulator. Okay, I know in my mind when I'm like, oh, I want to do some endurance racing because I've just watched 24 Hours of Le Mans or whatever, 24 Hours of Nürburgring or some 6-hour race. You will go in your head, you'll go, oh, that's the endurance sim. I'll try that. It's going to have those cars in it. At least with F1 2023, it's like, oh, I've just depressingly watched another laboriously boring, rigged formula race with no overtaking apart from when the driver pushes the button, with obnoxiously loud commentary. At least you can then go, oh, I want to experience that for myself. I will play F1 2023. It's got Formula cars. It's got the tracks that are there. You know what you're getting. Whereas with AC, Race Room, AMS2, R-Factor 2, and a bunch of other sims, it's like, why would you jump to those? Other than them claiming to be the most realistic sim, and unfortunately, only one sim can be the most realistic sim. So, you know, that lack of coherent nature to it, I think, is a really big problem as well. And also that feeds into the other points we made. Now, what I would say is that I do get it. You know, if you say if you're marketing a game, you're selling it, and it's like, oh, there's loads of cars there. There's tons of cars. Like someone that doesn't know might go, oh, that's really cool. I've always wanted to drive that car. So I get that component of it, and I do think that people are like, oh, it's value for money because I've got 100 cars for £30. But it's not value for money if those cars are actually mostly crap and don't represent the real cars, which they generally often don't anyway, even when they're good. But the big thing is that if you look at other games out there, it really shows that a minimal focus, really makes sense and really helps with games. So if you look at Counter-Strike Go, for example, most people are just playing 3 maps in that game, and I've got like 3,000 hours in Counter-Strike Go. I'm not proud of that. And I just play with the M4, the AK, and the P90, and then some of the pistols. So I don't even use all the weapons in it. I just use the basic weapons, those that I've selected. Most people playing it only use like an AK, Desert Eagle, AK, whatever. And most people are only playing a couple of maps. And they'll play it for thousands of hours, way more than they play any driving simulator. And that's fine, it's compelling, the gameplay's compelling. Just as racing, any decently simulated race car is really, really compelling. Even if it's a Formula Ford, you could drive that around Alton Park for 4 days in a row non-stop and still have a really fun time. Rocket League is literally the same. It's the same track. It's the same. It's like a stadium. It's the same thing. It's a football pitch. It's always the same. With there's multiple cars in there, but most people just play with the basic car. And you play that for hundreds and hundreds of hours because you're playing for the gameplay. You're not necessarily playing for the novelty of the different vehicles. Obviously, real world sport as well. Table tennis. You don't change the table to different shaped tables. I mean, you can do. Some people might do, but you know, it's pretty well established what a table tennis table is, and you play with that framework and you enjoy the gameplay that evolves from that sort of standardized rule set. Full-size tennis, golf, football. It's all actually, in terms of like the football doesn't change constantly. You can have different footballs, but for the most part, people are playing with the same football. What they're focusing on is the actual gameplay and the other components of it, not the novelty gimmick of the ball, or you know, you see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? It's like driving simulators seem to not actually think of themselves as an actual game or the actual core gameplay that they offer. They seem to get distracted by being this sort of vague, wish-washy, uncertain of what they are thing, and as a result, the Sims are a mess. So, I think less cars, pretty much always going to be better in driving simulators for those main 5 reasons. It'll be interesting to see what reasons you guys can think of. I definitely need to learn how to make more concise and precise videos. But maybe you guys like me wittering on and ranting about this sort of stuff. Maybe you don't. Sorry, bad luck. But if you do like this kind of stuff, make sure you click the subscribe button, make sure you click the like button, and make sure you drink far too much tea. But until the next one, take care, happy sim racing, and goodbye everyone.